His name was Ibn Khaldun, centuries before Adam Smith, Keynes, or modern macroeconomics. He explained why economies expand, why states grow fat, and why they eventually collapse under their own weight. Born in 1332 in what is now Tunisia, Ibn Khaldun entered a world of chaos. Dynasties rose and fell overnight. Cities prospered and emptied just as fast. Unlike academics isolated in universities, Ibn Khaldun lived at the center of power. He served courts, advised rulers, and watched governments mismanage wealth, overtax their people, and lose legitimacy, then act surprised when everything unraveled. Over time, he noticed a striking pattern repeating across cultures, religions, and continents. Discipline turned into comfort, comfort turned into decadence, and decadence turned into decline. What Ibn Khaldun understood and what makes his work so relevant today is that economic systems aren't machines. They are social organisms. They depend on trust, cohesion, shared incentives, and belief. When these weaken, no amount of gold or authority can save the structure. At the heart of his thinking was the concept of asabeya, loosely translated as social cohesion, to glue that holds groups together. Economically, it's more than cultural unity. It's trust. It's the willingness to cooperate, invest, and sacrifice for a system larger than oneself. Ibn Khaldun observed that societies with strong cohesion were productive, resilient, and capable of generating wealth, even with limited resources. Groups that trusted each other worked harder, defended institutions, and enforced norms that supported long-term stability. Wealth followed naturally, not because they were rich to begin with, but because their structure allowed productivity to flourish. But success brings its own challenges. As wealth accumulated, elites grew distant from the productive base. Rulers became insulated. Bureaucracies expanded. Positions were inherited rather than earned. The discipline that built the system soft. Comfort replaced necessity, and cohesion weakened. This wasn't a moral judgment. He wasn't scolding societies for being lazy. He was explaining human incentives. When survival is no longer urgent, behavior changes. Risk tolerance drops. Innovation slows. Extraction becomes easier than creation. The state begins to live off past success rather than present productivity. Ibn Khaldun's analysis of taxation captures this perfectly. Early in a state's life, taxes were low. People worked, traded, and invested willingly because rewards outweighed the burden. Economic activity flourished. Revenue grew. As the state matured, rulers increased taxes to support expanding courts, armies, and administrations. At first, revenue rose, but eventually, higher taxes scourged production. Trade shrank. The tax base eroded. To maintain revenue, taxes were raised again, accelerating the decline. The state didn't collapse because it taxed too little. It collapsed because it taxed too much of a shrinking economy. Centuries before the term existed, Ibn Khaldun described diminishing returns. He extended the same logic to government spending and corruption. Rulers became accustomed to luxury. Public funds were diverted to preserve status, not productivity. Bureaucracies multiplied. Corruption wasn't criminal, it was normalized. Spending rose faster than output. Taxes increased. Trust eroded. And cohesion weakened. The state spent more to get less, trapped in a cycle of its own making. Sound familiar? Replace dynasties with modern institutions, courtiers with bureaucracies, caravans with supply chains. And the logic still applies. Ibn Khaldun wasn't describing medieval quirks. He was describing universal behavior under prosperity and power, perhaps his most powerful insight. Markets reflect people before they reflect numbers. Prices move because confidence moves. Productivity rises when incentives align. Decline begins, not with sudden collapse, but with subtle shifts in behavior. Less trust, more extraction, weaker cohesion. Awareness doesn't prevent decline, it removes illusion and replaces surprise with clarity. If Ibn Khaldun were alive today, he wouldn't be impressed by technology, financial instruments, or market speed. He would look past the screens and focus on what always mattered: incentives, cohesion, and power. He would see how modern economies still fall prey to the same patterns he described centuries ago. Modern economies love to believe they've escaped history. You talk about progress as if it's linear and permanent. Better data, better policy, better institutions. But Ibn Khaldun's insight cuts through that optimism. The cycle doesn't disappear with advancement, it accelerates. Social cohesion still exists, just harder to see. It appears as trust in institutions, confidence in currency, belief in rules, and willingness to cooperate. Strong cohesion fuels growth. Weak cohesion fuels extraction, short-term thinking, and collapse. Boom periods reveal this clearly. Growth feels productive, innovation spreads, and returns align with output. Over time, success concentrates capital. Barriers rise. Financial engineering outpaces real production, and wealth becomes about positioning rather than creation. Governments face pressures identical to those he describes. Status expand, programs multiply, layers thicken. Prosperity sustains only as long as the underlying structure remains intact. Modern tools: taxation, debt, monetary policy change, mechanics, but not the principle. When the cost of maintaining the system outweighs participation benefits, trust erodes, compliance weakens, debt masks the problem temporarily, but the dynamic remains. The system consumes future output to maintain present structures. Ibn Khaldun would recognize pre-collapse phases immediately. When appearances matter more than foundations, when leaders mistake temporary stability for permanent strength, collapse isn't driven by malice, it's normal behavior under success. Incentives guide individuals. Institutions protect themselves. Elites rationalize extraction. Only when viewed as a whole does the pattern become clear. Financial markets amplify these cycles. Asset prices outpace wages. Speculation outpaces production. Wealth illusions form. When corrections come, they don't just reset. Prices stay. Test confidence. Who trusts the system? Who bears the cost? Ibn Khaldun understood that legitimacy matters more than force. Productivity cannot be compelled indefinitely. Decline comes from loss of cooperation, not scarcity. Cycles are social, behavioral, and economic. Old structures weaken. New groups with stronger cohesion rise. History resets, not to achieve balance, but because incentives demand it. Ibn Khaldun never promised escape. Decline isn't failure, it's a consequence of success. The same forces that build wealth eventually erode the conditions that made it possible. For individuals, his framework offers perspective. Understanding cycles doesn't make you immune, but it changes interpretation. Peaks aren't permanent. Scale is instability. Incentives shift before prices. Financial freedom begins not with timing or prediction, but with humility, acknowledging that systems are temporary, confidence fragile, and cohesion more valuable than any asset class. You don't need to outrun the cycle, you need to stop being surprised by it. Ibn Khaldun's genius wasn't predicting the future. It was stripping away its mystery. Economics and human behavior become visible, and once visible, cycles lose their power to shock. History doesn't repeat because people are foolish, it repeats because incentives remain stubbornly consistent. Beneath every market, state, and financial system lies a fragile foundation: trust. When trust holds, prosperity follows. When it fractures, decline begins quietly, long before headlines catch up. If this perspective gave you new insights, subscribe to the Wealth Code Official. History has the answers, and here we show you where to look.